Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning if you're joining us from North America, where I'm based. If you're in Europe, you're about halfway through your day. And if you're in Asia, you're right about to wrap up. So thank you so much if you're joining us live. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Made of Millions YouTube channel and Facebook page as well. My name is Teodora Pavkovic. I'm a psychotherapist, parenting coach, and an international speaker. And I'm also one of the advisory board members of Made of Millions. And this is the third series that I've done on the Made of Millions YouTube channel and the Facebook page as well. The topic of the first one was digital wellness. The second series focused on positive psychology and a few positive psychology practices. And then for this third one, given kind of the time period that we found ourselves in, we felt that it would be particularly useful to talk about self-care practices. And so what we decided to do was to split up the series into 5 episodes, like we've done with the previous 2 as well, and to really dedicate each episode to one particular self-care practice or one particular area of self-care. And so for the previous episode, which you can rewatch here on YouTube or Facebook, depending where you're watching us, on which platform, where I was talking about emotional intelligence and emo diversity in particular, which I've done a TEDx talk on, so I'd recommend that you have a look at that as well. And then today I'll be talking about digital detanglement. And so if you are joining us live, please feel free to say hello, drop a comment in the comment section. I won't be able to see these live, especially if you have any questions, but I will make sure to look through our chat box at the end of our presentation. So for those of you who have been following me, who've been following my work, you know that I really enjoy talking about digital health, digital wellness, digital well-being, our connection to technology, our relationship to technology. I'm particularly interested in digital wellness when it comes to the family and when it comes to the parent-child connection. And this is a piece of art, an illustration that I found relatively recently. I would really encourage you to look this artist up. Jan Kalwait. You'll be able to find him on Instagram and I think a few other social media platforms. He's done a few of these representations of what I consider to be representations of digital entanglement that I just think are spot on. And this one in particular, I'm a huge fan of Leonardo da Vinci, and so I really appreciate the parallel here with the Vitruvian Man. But I just think this illustration does an incredible job of really showing just how entangled we are in our tech, in our various forms of tech. And you see this really kind of enlarged brain here that is trying to accommodate for all of these different types of platforms and notifications and messages and connections and communications. And one of the other reasons why I love this illustration is because what I'll be telling you a little bit more about later on is the fact that the problem with the way we use technology right now, or the problem with the issue with this digital entanglement, has to do on the one hand with the way the technology is designed, but on the other hand with the way our brain is designed as well. And so to start off with, I want to take you way back, several decades back. Some of you may recognize this, some of you may not. This is definitely going to raise a few eyebrows, which is why I often share this image at the beginning of the talks that I do with middle school and high school students, in particular college students as well. And I just kind of like to toy with them and ask them if they know what this is. So those of you who are born probably in the 80s, potentially the 90s, but those of you who were born in the 70s, 80s will definitely remember this phone. This may have been your first phone. This was the phone that I got when I was about 17 years old. This was my first mobile phone, and it wasn't actually mine. It belonged to my whole family. And I just thought it was the most wonderful thing ever. But in terms of being or becoming entangled in it, there wasn't really too much to become entangled into. On the bottom right corner there, again, this may seem completely foreign to you, but this was one of the only games, or the only game really, that was available in this phone, and it was called Snake. And I can assure you that you wouldn't have spent hours and hours playing this game. That's for sure. So I wanted to start off with this image and just kind of compare and contrast a little bit what technology used to look like a few decades ago and what it looks like now. And I think that comparison is part of the answer for why we are so entangled at this point. Like I said, it would have been very difficult to be motivated enough to spend hours and hours playing Snake. As fun as it was for a few minutes, though. But like I said earlier, I see there as being two kind of categories or two broad reasons for why we are so entangled at this point when it comes to our technology and our various devices and platforms. And like I said, part of that reason is because of the way the technology itself is designed. And of course, it's moved ahead a lot and become a lot more kind of intricate and complex since the days of Snake and since the days of my mobile phone in 1998. But a piece of kind of design or technology that is much, much older than that even is our brain. And there are certain elements of our brain, certain kind of design features of our brain that make it very easy for that technology to fit in, to really become embedded, to really become entangled, and to then make it very, very difficult to separate out. And like I said, technology has come a very, very long way. So if I were to offer you the option of playing Snake for say an hour or 2 hours, and on the other hand, I offered you, this magical world, and for those of you who don't know, this is Fortnite, I think the choice would probably be quite easy. I don't think you would be way too confused about that. And one thing I always like to say to parents who have questions about their kids playing Fortnite and various other games is that these games were not designed to be played for a couple of minutes in the way that Snake maybe would have been played before. They are colorful, they are immersive, they're very varied, there's a lot of novelty, and then there's a lot of change, there's a lot of constant updates. It's a multiplayer game. You can play with pretty much anybody in the world who you want to. And so the game is designed in such a way to entice you and to entangle you, in that sense, to keep you there for as long as possible. And so some of the kind of the basic elements of technology design that we need to consider for any of us who do feel like we are kind of excessively attached or hooked to our technology are these three, and they're the main ones. If you'd like a slightly deeper dive into this particular topic of technology design, I'd recommend that you go back to my first series with Made of Millions, which was on the topic of digital wellness. And you will see there in the first episode in particular, I talk a little bit more about the 4 facets of technology design that make it especially easy for us to get hooked and attached. So I won't go into as much detail for this, except to say that the accessibility of our technology, its seamless integration into pretty much every aspect of our life, and this lack of friction, which people are increasingly starting to talk about as not being perhaps the best thing ever, are some of the reasons why we've become so easily entangled in our tech. And so these are kind of some of the areas which we want to start thinking about when we think about how can we simplify really that relationship with technology and make ourselves feel a little bit more independent of it. And this lack of friction is kind of a coin with 2 sides. So if you're talking to a designer, you're talking to a data scientist, you're talking to a person in the tech world, in digital marketing, a lack of friction is a very good thing. You want to reduce the friction as much as possible because, of course, you want the user to use your product, interact with it as much as possible. If you are the user and if you are a professional who's concerned about the user's well-being and their use of technology. So if you're a tech ethicist, if you're a digital wellness practitioner like I am, this lack of friction worries you. And it's a little bit troubling because it just makes it way too easy to check anything on, say, our phone, but of course it applies to other pieces of hardware as well. It becomes way too easy to text somebody, to post something, to comment, and so on. And this is where that mindless use of technology comes in. And so what we want to think about is how can we increase that friction a little bit? How can we make it a little bit more difficult to use our tech? Not to the extent where it's going to be incredibly frustrating, because we don't want that either. But we want to find some techniques and tools that we can use in order to separate ourselves from it a little bit. And so I'm going to give you one of the examples of things that I use. And this is a little shout out to a very cool organization that organizes the National Day of Unplugging. I'd recommend you check them out if you don't know them yet. This is one of their cell phone sleeping bags, which first of all is quite a cute thing to look at. It's really practical. When I first got this bag, I tested it out just to kind of run a little experiment and see if the out of sight, out of mind principle applies. And I can say that it absolutely does. So keeping my phone in something like this, and of course you don't have to have this one, it can literally be anything that you want. You can cover your phone with a book and keep it in a designated place, whatever your preference is. But keeping my phone in here definitely helped me forget about it and not think about it quite as often. I would actually find myself maybe an hour later or so thinking, oh, right, I forgot that I have my phone. So in terms of increasing friction, the out of sight, out of mind principle is definitely one of the easiest ones. There are a lot of other ones, such as, of course, switching off notifications. One of the most popular ones a few months ago, maybe even 6 months ago at this point, was switching your screen to grayscale, right? So that it doesn't look quite as enticing. Again, it's not quite as seamlessly and pleasantly integrated in your life if it doesn't look quite as appealing. So there are a lot of different things to do, but these are some of the kind of the basic concepts of that tech design that I wanted to share with you so that you can think about them as you try to implement some techniques for yourself. In order to create a little bit more of that distance from your technology. Like I said, on the other hand, it's not just the tech. On the other hand, it's our brain design as well. And there are certain kind of inbuilt, naturally occurring features of our brain that make it not just difficult with technology, but in this case, that's kind of the most important thing that we're talking about. It makes it very difficult to create that distance from our tech and to create that sense of kind of separation and independence. One of them, and I think this particularly applies when it comes to how we use social media, we do have a huge need to belong and to be accepted. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this particular aspect of our brain design, I would recommend you go back to the second series that I did, which was focused on positive psychology. And in one of those episodes, I believe it was episode 3 or 4, where I talked about the importance of relationships for the healthy development of the human brain, I talk about just how desperately our brain needs to belong and to be accepted. And so this is a really important thing to kind of register and to note if we find ourselves really heavily depending on our social media. In excessive ways, in ways that just don't feel good anymore, and to try and shift that out and see if there are other ways in which we can find that sense of belonging. It can still be through the use of text, so you can still use something like Skype, or you can use FaceTime. If you use WhatsApp as a messaging platform, you can use the video feature there. If you need to communicate with your parents or your sibling, your partner, your children, whoever it is, but to find a different channel other than social media to do that. The brain is incredibly distractible, and many books have been written on this. A lot of research has been done on this. Some research at Harvard University has shown that our brain gets distracted or is distracted about 47 to 50% of the time, right? So it's almost half the time that you spend when you're awake, your brain is kind of wandering off and shifting in a lot of different directions. Given how we use technology nowadays and what a huge source of information it is for us, and just how many different pieces of information are out there, we've made it incredibly easy for our brain to get distracted. And so one of the other things to think about is how can we keep our environment and the stimulation in it, the stimulants in it, to bare minimum. To not make it as easy for our brain to get distracted. And so really make sure that you surround yourself by the kinds of things that won't pull your brain in a lot of different directions. Again, when it comes to digital wellness, one of the biggest tips that we give is to try and minimize the number of tabs that you have open at any one time. And so the only two I have open right now are my StreamYard tab, because that's where I'm broadcasting from, and then the Chrome tab in which I have this platform. And those are the only two things that are there. It doesn't mean that my brain is still not getting distracted because, for example, I have flowers in the room that I'm sitting in, and so I'm occasionally thinking about those flowers and how beautiful they are and how nice they smell. But that is not getting in the way of me delivering this presentation to you right now. So it's not that it's not that kind of detrimental type of distraction. Thirdly, our brain has a negativity bias. And again, I've spoken more about this topic at different times in different places. We don't have too much time to go very deeply into it right now. But it's a survival mechanism, and it's a coping mechanism that our brain has developed over hundreds of thousands of years. Our brain would prefer to keep us safe and to keep us secure and to keep us alive. And so it's very willing to be wrong about negative things, dangerous things, alarming things happening in our environment, which is why we'll often jump at loud or strange or weird noises. If we catch something from the corner of our eye that looks a little bit strange or different to what we're used to, our brain is definitely going to be distracted by that and pulled in that direction. So we tend to look out for the negative. We tend to look out for negative stimuli in our environment. That's our brain's way of keeping us safe. One of the things that I posted about relatively recently on my social media is this relatively new phenomenon we have called doom scrolling. So doom scrolling, which refers to this habit that we've developed over the past few months, understandably, to just keep scrolling through negative news, even past that point of needing to be informed about what is going on with COVID and everything else that's been going on in the world, and just keep going to the point where we really don't feel good anymore. In fact, we feel horrible, we feel anxious, we feel really negative, maybe we feel sad, we end up feeling hopeless, but we keep doing it. And that feeds into this negativity bias. It feeds into, to a certain extent, being distractible. It feeds into the need that our brain has for information, but it also feeds into this final point. And that is the fact that our brain is an energy saver. Our brain uses about 20% of the energy that we consume on a daily basis through food every single day. So considering that it's a relatively small part of our body, it uses a huge amount of energy. And that is really expensive energy. It's energy that it wants to save for only the most important things. And so the brain really likes habits. It likes to convert as much of our behavior as possible into habits because then it doesn't really have to consciously think about it, which means it doesn't have to use a lot of energy to actually create that movement or to produce that movement. And so this is where some other aspects of tech design also fall into place really nicely. I've talked about the infinite scroll before, and that feeds into doom scrolling as well because there is no end to your news feed, right? It just keeps going and going and going and going. And so that's where we need to bring in a little bit of friction as well. We need to get very structured and very mindful of how we are, so for example, consuming the news, to make sure that we do it only at certain times of the day, that we only do it for a short period of time, that we only say consume news from one source or two sources that we really trust, that we make sure that we're informed in all the ways that we absolutely need to be, and that then we stop. And that at that point we put the technology away. So these are aspects of our brain that we can't change on a permanent basis. They are there. What we do need to do is think of some of these hacks, if you will, and some of these behaviors that we can change, some of the ways in which we can build some borders and some fences around how we use technology in order to make sure that it doesn't have a negative impact on us. One other idea that I wanted to share with you that I want to kind of encourage you to think about when it comes to just how entangled you feel. And I think it's a really helpful idea to help us become a little bit less tangled, a little bit more independent, is this idea of obligation. The obligation to always be on, the obligation to always be responsive, the obligation to share, the obligation to like, the obligation to comment, the obligation to engage, basically in content that we see online. Just last week, I spoke to a group of high school and college students, and I have another shout out right now to an organization called Text Less, Live More. It's a really wonderful organization, and Marie, their executive director, had invited me to speak to a group of their students. It's a student-run organization that wants to make sure that as few people as possible lose their lives in driving accidents that happen as a result of kind of mindless use of technology. And so Marie had invited me to speak to her students, and as we talked about some of the themes that we wanted to discuss, this idea of obligation came up. And she was saying that a lot of the students she was speaking to were complaining of this, and they were saying, we feel very obligated to show up and to be present in this virtual world, and to like and to comment and to engage with other people's content, but also to post our own content. And I thought that's a horrible feeling to have, in a horrible emotional state to be in, especially when you don't quite know why you're feeling it and you don't really know why you're experiencing it. And I'm sure that all of us have felt this sense to a greater or lesser extent at some point, whether it's to respond to somebody, so to engage with somebody else's content, or to create our own. And so this is an idea that I wanted to share with you, and that I want to ask you to notice in your own life, and to think about where that sense of obligation comes up for you. It may come up more when it comes to creating your own stuff or putting out your own content. It may come out more for you when it comes to engaging in other people's content, but to really think about it in a much more, again, mindful and intentional kind of a way, and think about, why am I actually doing this? What is the amount of meaning that's present in here? Is there any meaning that's significant to me? And am I really in this? Am I really present? Again, does this have any kind of meaning or purpose for me? And so there are a few other kind of additional tips that I wanted to share with you, that I think are kind of the macro kind of tips, or the macro concepts here, that can really help us a lot in terms of how we both create content and how we engage with content that's already out there. This is a little graph that I created for this talk that I done with these Text Less, Live More students last week, and I think it depicts one of the biggest issues that we have right now, which is this crisis of attention and meaning. X marks a spot in terms of where we want to be, in terms of how we both create and consume content. If it's something that holds a lot of our attention, that we're really interested in, and it has a lot of meaning for us, and potentially has a lot of meaning for other people too, hopefully. This is where that interaction with the technology and the use of technology can have a lot of pleasure, and can be even very nurturing and very helpful to us as well. We want to ask ourselves the question of why we tend to be in those very low meaning areas of this particular graph. Sometimes we'll experience a high level of attention. We'll have a lot of attention for something that we're consuming, but the amount of meaning in there is actually very, very low. And regardless of how much we may love watching pet videos, after a certain amount of time, even though our attention is still there by maybe the 10th or the 20th video, the amount of meaning has probably drastically reduced, and yet we're still engaging with that content. So low meaning and high attention is one problem. I think the biggest problem really is the low attention and low level of meaning. And that is something that we do engage in relatively often as well. Paying very little attention, again, scrolling, and really experiencing very low levels of meaning as well. And as I observe how people use different social media platforms, I've noticed a lot of this when it comes to Instagram in particular. Very, very, very short bursts of attention, sometimes next to no attention at all, and very little meaning. And you can see that, you can observe it as you see how people consume that content, moving through it very, very quickly, to the point where obviously nothing is coming in, nothing is absorbed, and yet still staying on that platform for extended periods of time. Right? So this interaction, this interplay between attention and meaningfulness, which I think is really important and very helpful as well. If you watched my first series on digital wellness, you would have seen this in, I believe it was episode 2 or perhaps 3, where I talked about our brain on social media. And so these were some of the questions that I shared at that point. I think they're very helpful for this idea of becoming digitally detangled, thinking about our social media use and whether it satisfies some of these questions. So one is, what do we expect from social media? And then what do we actually get from it? Because remember, our brain needs belonging and our brain needs acceptance. One of the things that we know is that searching for, and this has mostly been shown in women, but it occurs in both women and men, searching for a lot of these fit inspiration videos actually it doesn't create that motivation that you may be seeking in order to improve your fitness levels or look better, feel healthy, or whatever it is. But oftentimes it backfires and creates a lot of, or worsens really, the body issues that a lot of women already have or start to have once they start engaging with some of this content. And again, Instagram has been shown to be especially problematic when it comes to that. So if I'm expecting to be inspired for the purpose of my fitness, my fitness regime, and I notice that I actually don't feel good, I start feeling worse, then I need to ask myself that question of what my expectation is, and if it's not being met, then I probably need to step away from that. The other question kind of relates to the previous slide, which is how can we use social media more mindfully? How can we use it more intentionally? And so again, if the point for me is to become a little bit more inspired, get me a little bit more likely to, whether it's work out or to eat in a healthy kind of way, it may be that looking at pictures of very fit women is making me feel worse. But if I follow accounts on whatever social media platform it is, that show a lot of pictures of healthy food and recipes for healthy food, a lot of pictures of people consuming that healthy food or talking about it, talking about how tasty it is or whatever else, and I find that ends up motivating me a lot more, that is a much more mindful and intentional and purposeful way of consuming social media in my case, if that is what I'm seeking. So how can we define that clear purpose for it in our lives? And for example, if I choose to be on Pinterest and consume the content there, that may be my clear purpose. I'm looking for healthy food recipes, or I want to see pictures of good food because that's going to help and motivate me. There was a wonderful, very, very simple, very brief study that was conducted by the Female Lead, which is a charity that focuses on a lot of women's issues. They simply asked a group of teenage girls to not change their Instagram use in any other way, except to follow a few more women who come from the fields that these girls were very interested in. So it could have been, again, fitness, athletics, it could have been acting or the performing arts, space exploration, science, political leaders, whatever it was. But to start following these women. And a few weeks later, they went back and interviewed these girls. And some of the things that they reported back were really quite extraordinary. Some of them went as far as to say that they didn't realize that social media could be used in that kind of way. They didn't know that could be its purpose, because they were hugely inspired, they were hugely motivated. That led them to connect to a lot of other women who were very similar to the ones that they were originally interested in. They had these new topics to talk to their friends about. It was just a really uplifting, again, I like to use the word nurturing, a very nurturing experience for them. And it really completely changed kind of fundamentally the way they interacted with social media. And I think asking some of these questions can really help all of us do that. Finally, and again, if you've followed my work, or if you've watched some of these previous episodes that I've done here with Made of Millions, you know that emotional intelligence and emotional awareness is hugely important for me. It's, I think, one of the most anchoring things that we can use as we try to improve our relationship with technology and detangle ourselves from it a little bit more. So the main question that I really think that ultimately we need to ask ourselves is, how does this technology make me feel? How does me interacting with it make me feel? If it's nurturing, if it's uplifting, if it's inspirational, if it's motivational, if I do need a break and need to sometimes watch mindless kitten videos or whatever it happens to be, and I feel great afterwards because I feel like I've disconnected from a very heavy workload, that's wonderful. There are all sorts of ways in which we can consume technology so that it doesn't leave us feeling worse, so that it actually leaves us feeling better. But this is one of the questions that we need to ask. How does it actually make us feel? Do we feel good or do we feel bad? Those are very, very general terms. And again, if you're interested in emotional intelligence. I talked a little bit more about that during my previous episode, and you can also go to my website and find a little bit more content on that there. But generally speaking, do I feel great? Do I feel good? Do I feel better? Do I feel more connected? Do I feel like I belong more? All these other things that we need as human beings. Or do I feel worse? Am I experiencing more FOMO, fear of missing out? Am I feeling very envious? Am I very jealous? Am I hating on my friend because she's at this wonderful holiday? Whatever it is. But have a look at that, and then see what the balance is like. If your social media use or whatever form of tech use keeps making you feel really negative and really bad, then it's time to ask some of these questions, and ask questions around attention and around meaningfulness and around purpose and around intention as well, so that your tech use doesn't make you feel bad. Because obviously the fact of the matter is that we can't run away from it. We can't really get away from all these different forms of technology. If you do choose to go on a more kind of severe digital detox, or remove all or most technology from your life, that's fantastic. If that's the decision that you make. For the most part, people are looking for some form of moderation, some kind of moderate use. And so that's what we really need to learn to do. We need to learn how to become more digitally independent, and how to use this technology in a much more mindful, intentional kind of a way. There are two more ideas that I want to leave you with before we wrap up. This is just kind of a reminder of my definition of what being digitally well means that I've shared before. And what it means really is using technology mindfully, intentionally, and humanely in such a way that it doesn't tarnish your psychological and emotional well-being, or the psychological and emotional well-being of others. And I think that's very important to think about it from not just the perspective of yourself in terms of how it makes you feel, but to also realize that it's about the other people as well, with whom you're interacting, with whom you are connecting, who are viewing the content that you're putting out as well. So it's really a balancing act between yourself in terms of what you consume, and the other people around you in the virtual space in terms of what your output is. And then finally, the one kind of concept that I really want you to walk away with is that your time, attention, and personal information are precious resources. And I think if we do consider them as that, our attitude towards them will immediately change. And the way we address our time and our attention and our personal information will dramatically change. I think all the more so right now during this very, very difficult phase for humanity. This is something that the whole world is going through. And I think our time, attention, personal information just became a lot more precious during COVID than they were pre-COVID. And so I think now really is the time to consider this even more seriously than we did before, and to really reconsider our relationship with technology even more seriously right now, again, because we are depending on it so much right now. So with that, I would like to wrap up this second episode of my third series here on digital detanglement. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm very excited about next week's episode because I'll be doing something that I haven't done yet through these live broadcasts with Native Millions. What I'm going to be doing is basically guiding you through a self-compassion exercise. And this is one based on the work of Dr. Kristen Neff, who's really considered to be a pioneer when it comes to the field of self-compassion. I will be taking one of the exercises that she has developed and that she shares as part of her free resources on her website. And whoever will be joining us live, we're going to go through that exercise together. So I'm very excited about that. So if you would like to experience a self-compassion break, I invite you to join me next week. It's going to be the same time and the same place. So it's going to be Monday next week at 10 a.m. Eastern time here on the Native Millions YouTube channel. Connie, thank you so much for joining us live. Thank you for being here as always. And thank you all so much again. I will be seeing you next week. Bye.